So, calculating return on investment for a preventive maintenance specialist. Before we go into that, I'm going to tell you just a little bit about who I am, and then I'm actually going to try and see who we have in the audience, because I want to make sure that if we're all administrators, I'm not talking as if you guys are all turning wrenches, and if you're all turning wrenches, I don't want to talk as if we're all doing administration. So, first of all, my name is John Garrett. I started off in the Navy. That's where I got my electronics training, and then I served in the Gulf War. When I got out, I had this great idea. I was going to sell industrial electronics in Cincinnati. I do not lie well enough to sell industrial electronics in Cincinnati. Okay. So I called a buddy of mine who was in lithotripsy service, and he said, "Hey, why don't you come down?" And after 6 months, they said, "We're tired of paying x-ray guys. We're going to send you to x-ray school." They expanded into nuke med. And this, I didn't think we needed a list, but I went to a ton of tech schools in the last 20 years. Everything from nuke med, CT, MRIs, all manufacturers or RSTI. I'm a multi-modality, multi-vendor, master of none. But I also then went back to Wilberforce University, which, as a side note, is the oldest historically black college in the United States of America. It has a very proud history, and I got my bachelor's in Health and Human Services Management. I work for Kettering Health Network, and I've been doing this for 20 years. The whole idea of this came to me one night when I was doing a late service call, and I happened to catch a guy I had known for years, and anybody that's been in this business knows it's a small world. And he was getting ready to go do a PM, and I said, "Wow, doing a night PM." He said, "Well, my daughter's sick, and so I have to be home during the day. So to keep me employed, they're letting me do PMs at night." I said, "Oh, that's really nice." And so I followed up with him a couple months later, and they said they like it so well, they've actually given me a raise and asked me to keep doing this at night. And so since then, it's one of those things that's kind of bubbled in my head. How do you justify this? And then I started talking to administrators who actually are in charge of running your MRI departments, your CT departments, basically your directors of radiology, and saying, "What are your numbers?" And so that's what we're going to go through, is how to get real numbers, not just inflated things where you can sell the deal, but to get real numbers to see if you can benefit from a PM specialist. First of all, what is a PM specialist? Now, it sounds like a stupid question, and to be honest, what's going to be more important is what is a PM specialist not? But this is very simple. It's someone you have that performs only preventive maintenance, and that only is what's key, because that's how you're going to end up with your return on investment. All right? And it's a cost-saving measure to accomplish required preventative maintenance. Pretty straightforward, seems pretty simple. But here, what a PM specialist is not, and this is what you'll be tempted to use a PM specialist for when you have this extra guy who's doing PMs. They'll want to use him for on-call coverage. They'll want to use him for image equipment repair or vacation coverage. Now, I'm not going to say that you can never use them for vacation coverage, ever, but you got to be really careful if you're going to go down that road, because the whole concept is he is there simply to save you money by doing the PMs. All right, and when we implement him, you'll see why it's so important that he's only doing PMs, or she. First of all, you want him to be off shift. This is where you're going to actually see your savings, and we're going to run through the numbers a little bit. I've got ones from just two of the hospitals that I work with, and I'll show you the actual numbers. But if he's off shift with preferred third shift, he has a turnover in the morning. What this does is this keeps you from shutting down your MRI peak times, including cath labs, whatever PMs that you're trying to get done by this individual. That's where your real money savings is. That's where you can go and say, "Listen, if you've got a cath lab that's running 8 in the morning to 8 at night, shut you down for a PM, which we have to do, how much money are you losing? How much money, and we'll go through those numbers again in a minute, but that's where the big majority of everything is going to come from. Depending on your state labor laws, this is based on the state of Ohio where we're at. In the state of Ohio, anyone who's paid hourly wage is not required to have overtime until they've put 40 hours in. It doesn't matter if they work 2 20-hour days, or if they work 4 10s, or if they work 5 8s. So that would be, for the state of Ohio, or someone similar, your 4 10-hour shifts or your 3 12-hour shifts. And that really is also based on the length of the PM. Now, for us, the length of the PMs for our CTs are pretty much around 6 hours. But if you do a 6-hour PM, what are you going to do after that 6-hour PM? Well, do you want them to float around for 4 hours? We find that you do a 6-hour PM on our CT. You can do a 3-hour PM on a general rad room. He's actually made a good night of it, and then can move on from there. That all comes into play a little bit later, but that's the reason for the 10 or the 12s, depending on what we're doing and depending on what you find your PM's requirements are, based on model, modality, et cetera. That's how you'll decide what kind of time frame, what kind of shift should these guys work. But again, if your labor laws are different in the state you're working in, where you have anything after 8 hours is overtime, or if it's a company policy, you have to consider that into your numbers. We find that prioritizing your PM schedule, obviously all the high dollar items are the ones we want him to do. If he can't get to the general rad room, that's cool. If he can't get to the portables, those are the bottom of our list. For us, the MRIs, CTs, nuke med cameras, all those things that make us a lot of money and don't want to be shut down during the day are the things that we're focused on getting done. Now, the other thing is scheduled by location. Are we able to schedule him for a full night of work at one hospital? We are a 7-hospital system. If there are a couple of our hospitals that are relatively close, so it's not a big deal, but also I don't know about your hospital. Some of our hospitals are in very nice neighborhoods. Other of our hospitals, we don't necessarily want somebody traveling through at night if we don't have to have them going and traveling through there at 4 in the morning. Because we all know that some of the hospitals are on very cheap property, which typically tends to be not the nicest neighborhoods. So those are all things that we want to consider when we're implementing. So schedule for a PM specialist is more important than your average service guy. Because these are going to be, I don't want to say inflexible, but you really want to have, okay, you're going to hospital X tonight and you're going to do PMs. And then you go to hospital Y the next night and do PMs there. That's all part of implementation. All right, so your benefits is that, first of all, in our hospital, it's inevitable. We'll block off a schedule for a PM. Our engineer will be there with all his tools, ready to go, 10 o'clock in the morning. Okay, he's there. And somewhere, if we're lucky, around noon, 1 o'clock, he can actually get the equipment. Because no matter how they block the schedule off, somehow patients end up on the table before he gets there. This has been a battle, and it's been a battle since I've been in imaging, especially with the things that reimbursement's high on. So this will free them up to actually do the things that we want them to do. The benefits also include, of course, that the operation is not interrupted. Now, there's a lot of intangibles there. That means that my mom can get a CT if she needs to get a CT because she doesn't have to wait another day or have to schedule in another hospital. That also means that my hospital doesn't lose income because my mom went to the other hospital to get the CT. So the improved patient care concept means that it's just that simple. There's more access for the patients so that there's not the whole scheduling nightmare. And we all know that CT, MRI, especially CT, when we get a big day where a bus crashes or something and we have a bunch of ERs coming through, the CT gets behind schedule. They just do. And so if you're already scheduled there and then they've got the next day blocked off, scheduling can get ugly. We maximize income, of course, by not being down. We're open when we make the most money. That keeps a lot of administrators happy. And improve PM quality. Now, this is an abstract concept that if you've never turned wrenches, for those of you who haven't ever gone and done a PM on a piece of equipment, just let me explain that when you've got a high dollar piece of equipment down, and those guys who have turned the wrenches know this, you've got somebody looking over your shoulder with a stopwatch saying, when are you going to be done? When are you going to be done? And even the most devoted service guy who's trying to do the best PM that's ever been done on that piece of equipment is feeling that pressure and may inadvertently not see something that may save money or downtime down the road. I can't tell you the number of times that I found something as silly as just a worn wire that I was able to patch that day that probably saved us innumerable amounts of downtime just by doing those simple inspections that we're supposed to do. But if you're rushed, are you going to catch all of that? I think not. I know I myself don't like having those people over my shoulder while I'm doing a preventive maintenance. Of course, we don't like it when it's down either and broken, but the better PM, which would inadvertently, or not inadvertently, but should lead to longer life, less downtime overall. That's the whole concept of the PM in the first place. And patient safety and better results from the equipment. Did that make sense? Okay. Okay, so here's the fun part of the money, and I'm only shooting for about an hour in here, guys, because if there's any questions, I want to talk about it, and if not, I want you to get out of here and be able to do whatever it is you want to do. This gets a little tricky, though. It looks pretty straightforward until we get into it. Now, we have the hourly income of the unit, which I get from my administrators because they all know. My directors of radiology can tell you that they make X number of dollars on unit 1, X number of dollars on unit 2. I lump them into one because in my situation, each of the 2 hospitals that I'm going to talk about, they each have 2 CTs and 2 MRIs that we're going to discuss. And here's where it can get a little tricky. Okay, I've got hourly income of units times the length of your PM times the number of PMs times the number of units. Now, number of units is where it gets tricky because you can real inadvertently inflate your number, which I would like everyone to avoid because you don't want to give an unrealistic expectation. So if I've got 2 CTs sitting side by side and I say their downtime during the day when I do a PM is half of what the daily income is, right? So I just count 1 full day because I've got 2 units for every PM. So I'll actually do 2 PMs, but it's 1 day of income. Even if it's on 2 different days, we're still only losing 1 full day of income because you're calculating half a day's income for 1 unit if you have 2 units. If you've got 3 units, that breaks into thirds. So 1 PM, you're only losing a third. You're still only going to count it as 1 PM. Now, if they're in different parts of the hospital, different cost centers, then you count them as full units. Does that make sense? Is everybody following me on that? Because the full unit for us, cost center is everything, is how we break things down. So if I have two CTs sitting beside each other, but they're on 2 different cost centers, I count 1 and 1. So that'd be 2. If they're the same cost center, the number I'm getting is for 2 units. I say 1 PM each is still only 1. All right. PM length. You must consider the block schedule time for the PM length. Our PMs are 6 hours on those CTs. They don't block off 6 hours, they block off 8 hours because they can't staff 2 hours for that second CT. So when they block it off, they're blocking off a full 8 hours. So I can count that as a full 8 hours, not a 6 hour. Now, if you have a 6 hour PM and they only block off 6 hours, then you're gonna have to adjust your numbers accordingly, right? If you're using a third party to do your PMs and you're bringing someone in-house, of course you can take that as a cost as well that you can add to your savings, right? If you were actually working for a third party, you would take your cost out, what you're charging the customer if you're doing this as a third party. Because there are a couple third party people that have been kicking around the idea of offering PMs after hours. And they were looking for ways to calculate, hey, how can I show my customer that I can save them money? And this is the way to do it. But you have to remember that your cost, or what you're charging your customer, obviously, would be added to the cost, not the savings. So here's some real numbers, at least as they were given to me by my radiology director. I've got 2 hospitals, one's relatively small and one's relatively large. And at this point, you should be able to see by the numbers, hospital 2 is my small hospital. If you have a very small hospital, we actually have an imaging center that we were talking about this with, that we can't calculate downtime for savings on a PM specialist because their census is not high enough for us to actually say they're losing money by us doing a PM. All right, so a PM specialist, and I want to point this out because I don't think I mentioned it earlier, not everybody benefits from a PM specialist. If you don't have the census, if you're a remote hospital in West Virginia that does 4 CTs a day, you're probably not going to show that savings that's going to pay for the guy to be a PM specialist, if you can even show the savings to have a guy in-house. So I've got my hospital 1, CT and MR numbers, as well as the hospital 2 with the CT and MR, and they each get 4 PMs per year. That's how we have it set up. You can run these numbers if you want, but those are the numbers I came up with. So as far as downtime goes, for just those 2 hospitals out of my system, my initial savings shows at 430, 232. Now, I want to go on to one more step on this idea of these numbers. I sat down and discussed with the director of radiology. If someone comes in and can't get their CT here because we're down for PM, how many of these people are going to actually just reschedule within the hospital, and how many of them are going to go to our competitor? Our larger hospital, for the first hospital, we have a competitor that is less than 1.5 miles away. So it is not uncommon for them to lose 100% of anybody that doesn't schedule and be seen. They will often go down the street. The other hospital, those numbers come from the original numbers, both the CT and the MR, come from a 10%, because they estimate they lose about 10% of those that have to be rescheduled. So we reduced that number by 10% on the front end, just so we're clear. Because we're trying to get real numbers, and they're still estimates, but we're still trying to use real numbers that we can go in and confidently say, yes, we're not trying to play a game here, we're trying to show you what you can really see. So, I'm about to show you numbers that are completely unrealistic on the costs. I want to put that in the outset because I wanted to make sure they were ridiculous, just so that we can show you that there is a cost savings even if you went to an absolute upper echelon. Now, these things would include a shift differential like we already spoke about, and overtime as far as laws or policies of your facility. So if you're at a facility that pays after 8 hours overtime, you have to consider that. Right, so training. What is it going to take to get this guy trained to do PMs? Because he doesn't have to be the master of everything. He just has to be able to go and do a PM competently and be able to do it in a manner that doesn't cause a problem. It's not quite the same as having to be able to troubleshoot it right down to every board. The interesting thing about that is some of the people I've spoken to here, RSTI, just anybody that does training, we've been talking about the idea of PM-only classes. To have somebody who could be trained in multiple modalities, multiple vendors, just to do PMs to fit a position that might be just like this. And they're all interested in that. And I'm sure that any one of them will put something together for you. So the other thing is, if you're doing in-house training, which is what some of what is going on with us is, you want to calculate as best you can loss of productivity or the extra man hours that are put onto the learning phase. So if I've got a guy, if I'm doubling up on my PMs because I've got a guy learning how to do them, that's a loss. And you can just calculate that straight out as the cost of whatever you're paying the guy who's running around, mileage, whatever your costs are associated with that. I think that's pretty straightforward. So here are the numbers I came up with, which are pretty ridiculous. The salary and benefits, and that includes a benefit package, we paid this guy really well for Ohio at least. And we paid him, and a package ended up being us $150 after we do the 401k, Social Security, all of those things that HR likes to talk to you about. And then we spent $100,000 in training. Now, first of all, if you spend $100,000 in training, I don't know what we were doing. But I just wanted a nice, big, fat number to chew up some of that. And we show a first-year savings of $180,000. This is if the guy does 16 PMs and drinks coffee the rest of the year. Okay? If he does 16 PMs, we spend $100,000 on him going to training, and he does nothing but drink coffee the rest of the year, we got $180,000 in our 2 hospitals. Now, down here in my little blue here, I actually did my 7-hospital estimate, which initially came out to over $1.5 million on just MR and CT, based on downtime. But they gave me revised numbers just before I came here. They said, oh, we gave you their old numbers. Let's give you the new numbers. With the new numbers, it actually comes out to about $2.1 million for employing a third shift PM specialist on just CT and MR. That's no other modalities. So after that, you get dwindling effects on return. And I point this out because then people who see these numbers are tempted to say, hey, well, let's get 2 PM specialists and we'll save a lot of money and go on, because we'll do all our PMs on third shift. again, we have hospitals where, I have one hospital that has 4 x-ray rooms, and it's a 50-bed hospital. I can't count a single one of those x-ray rooms as a benefit of having a PM done at night, because I can walk in there and I can have 2 guys doing PMs on 2 of the rooms at a time, and it doesn't mess up any of their workflow or their scheduling. So we can't count that at all. But to keep him busy, if he's already being paid and he's a fixed overhead, of course we're going to have him do it. That's just a benefit of an opportunity cost of our daytime guys, right? So is that all? We're all on the same page with that? Yeah. Because this is it. I mean, this is the key to all of this, is just simply downtime. All of the concept of better PMs and things, those are abstract and they're really hard to put measures on unless you already have a baseline. If you already know how long things are lasting, and then you would put this in place, you might be able after the fact to show a better return even than you're getting. But this really is put together to sell to my bosses. That was why this whole thing was put together, to go to my bosses and say, listen, you can make my life easier, everybody's life easier if we can do this. And when I get back, I'm supposed to give this presentation to my boss's boss's boss, who is basically the president of our hospital system, which I don't know if that's to impress him or just to convince him to spend the money. I don't know. But so, as we're talking now, in addition, for some reason, a lot of imaging guys seem afraid of nuke med, which I don't get, because for me, electronics was my first thing, so electrons are electrons are electrons. But if you add each of these modalities, again, in my situation, one of the hospitals, I can count C-arms as a cost savings because they run surgeries 8 to 8, and those C-arms are in constant use. My other hospital, they've got 3. That 50-bed hospital has 3 C-arms, and there's always 2 sitting waiting to go. So can't show that one as a savings. But of course, again, if we have the guy, he's going to do them all. And really last, these kind of got flipped, but last in that order, you would have your general rad rooms, and I didn't put portables in there, but portables as well. The big thing you're going to have to look at, though, in this is it's going to take time to develop a guy if he's not already a seasoned x-ray guy. He's going to cost you a little more up front than your day guys, if you want to keep him, which if you're going to put all this time and effort into making somebody who can do all these PMs, at least in our system, multimodality, multi-vendors, you're going to want to keep him. You're not going to want him to walk out the first time a day job comes available. But again, I used a pretty significant number for that. Something I don't have on a slide here that I have seen and I wanted to talk about is a natural resistance to this concept of a PM specialist. Now, for some of the guys that I've talked to who are turning wrenches, this comes from a sense of control. You're entering my territory. This is my equipment. And a little bit of fear that maybe they'd be replaced, I guess. Because the truth is long term, if this really works for you, you can reduce staff, or when someone retires, simply not replace them, because if the PMs are being done efficiently, we estimate that when we have our first guy retire, he won't have to be replaced. Simply because the workload will have dropped enough with the PMs being removed from the daytime that we will show that, hey, we can cut a whole, so we're 1 for 1. Ideally, it would be nice to be able to get 2 for 1, but at the same time, at least in our network, we would rather have an extra guy than have 1 guy short or a half guy short, simply because of downtime during the day. It is so much, I mean, the downtime that we reduce things by simply being there during the day to reset things, find blown fuses, take first looks, that's a big deal. And so we're looking at a 1 for 1. If you have a really big network, if you have a network that is a lot of hospitals in a relatively small geographical location, you might see 2 for 1. But then again, you're going to have to look at that and balance it and justify each one as you go, because the bean counters will not be happy if you're just telling, oh yeah, just get rid of 2 guys, we'll put a guy in, no big deal, or we'll just put some guys in and add on, and you're saving money, trust me. Doesn't go over well. So that is really the biggest thing that we're seeing now is that resistance. And it's coming from people who just want to dismiss it outright. But if I sat in a great educational event earlier that was data driving decisions. And this is the exact kind of thing we're talking about. If I have this data and I can show you what we're going to save, yeah, sure, you're going to have to pay a little more. Right now, I'm waiting to see what happens, but some of the big three, GE and Siemens at least, have been cutting field service guys. Might be a good time to get an imaging specialist that has experience, that you don't have to train from the ground up. But then again, if you want to train a guy from the ground up, maybe you need to do that too. But again, the other considerations, geography is a big one. Like I said, we have, most of our hospitals are in a reasonable region, but we have one outlier that's roughly an hour from everybody else. Everybody else, you can get there in about 30 minutes, 25 minutes, but it's a good hour down the road. I don't know how effective having a PM specialist do those PMs would be. That's one of those things that the numbers are, they're vague enough that I say, well, if we just do it for these hospitals, we can make money. We can make, tons of money. Can they be scheduled for minimal travel? Do you have some oddball thing you're doing at, in the evenings where you're actually having equipment being used that you would normally assume is not? I mean, if you have an ER, of course, you're going to have CTs being run, but if you have 2 CTs for most of our hospitals, that's not a problem. We can work on one, we'll work on the other at night, not a big deal. And now that I'm sitting here thinking about that, that's the other thing you have to watch out for. We have a small hospital that has 1 CT. So anytime it's down, of course, they have to divert for their ER. That doesn't matter if we have a PM specialist or not. We're doing right now, we have a guy who shifts his schedule for that one hospital to do a PM at 3 in the morning. And without that backup, we're not seeing any real savings. It's what we have to do. We're in that position. But on that, you can show opportunity cost savings. This guy who is a seasoned guy who does a great job for us, instead of being there from 3 o'clock in the morning, he can just show up on his regular shift when the guy does that one instead, and still be the guy that we're used to having, instead of us shuffling for 2 days while his schedule gets back on track. And again, I keep going back to the labor laws. I don't know the labor laws in your state. That would be something you'd want to talk to your HR. And if you're multi-state, if you're someone who goes across state lines, you'll want to make sure that those details are in order too. It's basically gathering a bunch of data to look at to say, hey, we can save money by putting somebody on 3rd shift who does nothing but PMs. And really, that's the meat of my presentation. I don't know, did I even go close? I don't even think we've been in here an hour. Nope, we have. We've been here like a half hour. So now the question is there anything about this concept that you'd like to talk about? I was leaving room for discussion anyway, but evidently we have a lot more. And if you want to take down my email address, if you run into any questions later, because a lot of times you'll have this rolling around in your brain. I know how it is. The convention's been a long couple of days, lots of stuff going on. You say, oh man, I wish I could ask John. Shoot me an email. I'll be happy to answer any of your questions that you might have about this.